Okay, hi guys, welcome to another episode of Terrier Talk. And this is the third in the little series where I'm talking about like dog training industry trends and, like things that are really pushed on social media as being good for dogs or bad for dogs, and, how I feel about those, and especially in relation to our little terriers. So, episode 3, we're talking about stress and whether all stress is a bad thing and should be avoided. Now, my like the shorthand for this, I guess, is my answer is no. All stress is not a bad thing, and not all stress should be avoided. But it is a massively important part of the picture when you're talking about behavioural work for a dog. Okay, so if you're talking about like modifying a behaviour, which is really what working with reactivity and all that kind of stuff is, whether you however you prescribe to whether you should be working with a trainer or a behaviourist or like however you want to think about it, that's what it is. Like, the truth of it is you're taking a dog that's performing a behaviour that has a function for them, and you are changing it, and that you should be, if you have a dog that is performing a stress-based behaviour like reactivity, you should be reducing all of the stress out of that dog's life in order to help them be less likely to perform that behaviour. Okay? So this comes out of the theory of, kind of crosses over from human psychology a lot, where they talk about stress buckets, and spoon theory is another thing that it gets called. And it's basically this idea that if you encounter lots of little stressful activities, they will end up compounding during either a short period, like a day, for example, or like over a longer period of time, and that they will then lead to a bigger stressful event, or make other stressful behaviours or kind of like reaction type behaviours more likely. And that is absolutely true. So we call it trigger stacking quite often in dog training, and that's a term that you'll hear. And, it's the explanation behind, okay, why does my dog only react at some dogs? Or like, we start a walk and he's great, and then by the end of the walk he's barking at dogs, and that is trigger stacking. So that is that dog, seeing the first dog and being a little bit stressed, seeing the second dog and being a bit more stressed, and seeing the third dog and being a little bit more stressed again. And then by the time they get to the fourth dog, they're barking at that dog, yeah. And that's, a similar situation in like a human sense would be like, you have a bad day at work, and then you get involved in somebody like cuts you up on the way home, on your journey home, and then you get home and your partner says something to you that really annoys you, and then you end up like shouting at them over like them asking to pass you the salt or something like that, which is in itself a really silly thing to react at, but you do because of all the other stressful events that led up to it. Like, even though that one event itself isn't as like highly stressful on its own, as it were. So because of that being an absolute truth, like that's a thing that happens, you've probably experienced it yourself at some point. We then go down the road of, okay, so we need to remove all stress from this dog's life, so that when they see that dog, they've got no build-up of stress, and we've got the ability to, we've got more of a window of training, if you like, so that they're not just going to react so quick, and that's going to help us get in with behaviours, alternative behaviours that's then going to, help us get over that problem. Rather than them reacting immediately, we'll have a little bit more space. Like, I just kind of call that like a window of training. And it's true. Now, the problem then comes when you start to have dogs, and these terriers are, very much these dogs, where a lot of the positive experiences in their life are also putting a lot of stress on them, okay? So, for example, chasing a ball. For example, high adrenaline tug play. For example, chasing something out in the environment. Like, these dogs are dogs that have been bred to ramp up very quickly in terms of their arousal states, and therefore that's going to put stress onto their nervous system. And in theory and in practice, to a certain extent, it is going to contribute to that overall stress picture. And then you've got a dog that's like, okay, I haven't seen any negative stresses all day, but I have seen, I have chased my ball and I have done all these things, and therefore, when I see that dog at the end of the day, I'm gonna bark at it. Okay, and none of it's not true. The problem is that, again, probably perpetuated a little bit by marketing, and want to make everything clear, and having that kind of polarized attitude that social media loves and pushes along, is that it's just a lot more nuanced than that. And you don't necessarily to remove all positive stress. So, for example, from a terrier, like, you can't let them dig in the garden, you can't do tug play with them anymore. And these are all things that, like, I've heard clients say to me, oh no, I'm not allowed to play with my dog anymore because that's too much stress for them. And the problem isn't the stress. The problem is the dog's ability to manage two things. One, to manage the stress, and two, to manage their arousal. Okay? So it's not really beneficial, therefore, to remove all of that stress, because yes, it's technically stress, but it's also relief of frustration. Okay? So you can think of like a person who runs for their mental health, for example. That running itself puts a lot of stress on the body. You puts a lot of physical stress on them, etc. But it's what relieves. It's what kind of relieves the frustration of the day, clears the mind, meets that person's exercise needs, and so on. Right, and that's the situation that your dog is in as well. So if you go down the road of saying, I'm going to remove all of the stress from my dog's life, and there may be some situations where it might be worth doing for a very short period of time. Like if you have a dog that's like so chronically stressed they can't step outside the door, then yes, you might do that for a short period of time. But the problem is it gets perpetuated and perpetuated. And so you've got a dog that is frustrated, reactive at things, and then basically you remove all of the joy from their life. And this happens loads. And then that dog, not only is it still frustrated, reactive at the thing that it's trigger, let's say other dogs, for example, it's now even more frustrated because you've basically just tried to turn it into a couch potato, like zombie who never gets to do anything positive with their life whatsoever. Because they're a dog that does all those positive things in very high arousal, right? And it's actually the arousal that you're scared of in that sense, because when that dog's up in that high arousal, you've got no control over them, okay? And a lot of them have got no control over themselves, in fairness, because they're just constantly jumping in and out, and they haven't learned to control it, and because it's the way we deal with that kind of thing, they struggle with that arousal management piece. So that's the problem. It's not the fact that your dog needs all elements of stress removing from its life. What it in fact needs is the right kinds of stress at the right time to help relieve frustration, to help meet the dog's needs, and to help it learn stress and arousal management. Okay, your body is like a system like any other. And if you give it little amounts of stress and it recovers from it, it will get better at recovering from it. So you can provide that stress in the form of play and going to more controlled environments and so on, and start to teach your dog and your dog's kind of nervous system and body, whatever, to get over that stress and to cope with that stress. And that's, in fact, what a dog who is stress reactive needs. They don't need a complete removal of all stress, okay? That's like saying to somebody who's, going through a difficult time at work, that what they need to do is go into the house, shut the door, and never come out again. Which is unfortunately what happens to loads of dogs when people get really extreme with this removal of stress. And things actually don't get better. In fact, a lot of the times they can potentially get a lot worse. So this kind of like ditch the walk trend, that's thing that happened for a long while. It's like, okay, your dog's reactive, so let's not walk them at all. Again, one that was perpetuated way too much, because you don't need to ditch the walk, you need to ditch the triggers. Okay, so you still want your dog to go out, you still want them to have at time. You still want them to not to be, you just want to get outlets for all their needs, but you just need to protect them from triggers for a little bit to reduce their reactions to those triggers before you start to then bring stress back in a controlled way. So what you don't want to do is get stuck in it. Like a lot of these trends, there's a reason for them. There's a basis of like real good fact, but they become kind of like trends, and people get really excited about them, and they become marketing slogans, like ditch the walk, and whole books written on why you shouldn't walk your dog and all this kind of stuff. And the reality, in fact, is that a lot of those dogs I see, the ones that are a bit like that, they're just bored. The dog's calmed right down, and I'm looking at the dog thinking, I think that dog's lost the will to live. I'm not so sure it's calm. I think it's just absolutely given up on its life, because they're not getting to do anything fun anymore. Yeah, and that's not, especially for a terrier, that's not how a terrier should live. They should get excited. They're excitable little dogs. They should have excitement and fun and enjoyment in their life. It's just everything in a level of moderation, which is always my granny's favourite saying. But I think it is so true in so many places, and that we've just got to be very careful with these kind of like dog training trends and the marketing of them, that is ultimately very successful from a marketing point of view, because it's polarizing and it makes you think, it does well on social media, and it does well, and people go at it because it's a solid concept that they can hang on to. But we absolutely must remember that it's always, always, always more nuanced, because there are so many factors going into it above and beyond just that dog's level of stress at that particular time. So that's one, if I'm honest, that I really don't like. I'm not so sure that it has that much of a positive spin on it. I'd almost rather a dog went out and reacted a couple of times every day, but still got to go out, than got shut up in their house, like on a and not allowed to play with the ball and not allowed to do anything that they enjoyed doing, because the person was trying to, make their life a hell of a lot less stressful. Well, I'm afraid there's stress in real life, and it doesn't mean that just because you have a level of stress at some point when you're out and about during your day, that doesn't mean that you should have therefore sat at home all day just to avoid it. And I think that's the danger with that trend. So whenever I work with a client, it's not something that I suggest that they ditch their dog's walks at all, unless it is an extreme case. And even in an extreme case, it's not something I'm doing for a long period of time. What I'm actually trying to say to them is, what you're trying to do is ditch your triggers for a little while, just to give the dog a bit of a break from that behaviour, partly as much to break a habit as anything else, and just kind of have a reset for that dog, so that they haven't been, so that when we then step in with some training and some alternative behaviours, it's just more of a chance that those behaviours are going to get traction, because the dog wasn't doing those negative behaviours just the day before. They've had a week or two off doing those behaviours, so to a certain extent we are breaking an established habit by doing that, as well as all the benefits that come from the stress reduction. So yeah, that's that one. So hopefully I'll be back next week. We're going to go for the biggie, okay? And in fairness, it's a biggie amongst dog trainers. It's something that, as dog owners, you're less aware of, I think, and that's this massive divide within the dog training industry. So I'm going to try and lay out a little bit of what it means when you hear these terms thrown around, and give you a little bit of my thoughts on it, why it's damaging, why hopefully things are starting to change, and also how it affects you, because ultimately that's really the important part. I mean, how it affects us as dog trainers is not really relevant to you guys as kind of ordinary dog owners so much, but like how it affects you, how to navigate it, and ultimately where I am in terms of my opinion on that things, and what sort of trainer I identify as, if you like. So I'll see you next week for that.